Adrian was not an ordinary man. People in the city knew him as one of the youngest billionaires who had built his empire with discipline and vision. He owned hotels, shipping companies, and even invested in technology. Despite his wealth, he was known for being calm, polite, and respectful to everyone who worked for him. He believed in treating people fairly, whether they were business partners or workers who cleaned the floors in his offices. Adrian's house was a grand mansion on the edge of the city, surrounded by green lawns and fountains. The gates were tall and strong, keeping the noise of the world outside, but inside the air was calm and peaceful. He lived there with his girlfriend, Clara. She was beautiful, charming in public, and she knew how to carry herself in high society. Many admired her for her looks and her style. Clara liked being around Adrian because he gave her everything she wanted. Expensive clothes, jewelry, trips to islands, and seats at charity galas where photographers always followed them. On the outside, Clara looked like the perfect partner for a man of Adrian's position. But behind the polished smile, Clara carried something Adrian never noticed in the beginning. She had pride, and with that pride came arrogance. In the mansion lived a maid named Grace. She was a young woman who had come from a small village to the city, hoping to earn for her family. Grace was quiet, hardworking, and honest. She never asked for much. Every morning, she would wake before sunrise, polish the silverware, sweep the marble floors, and prepare the rooms. Adrian liked her because she did her duties with care. She always kept her head down, respectful, and never complained, even when the work was heavy. Grace sent most of her earnings back to her parents and younger siblings. For her, the mansion was not just a place of work, but a chance to give her family a better life. Clara, however, never liked Grace. She saw her not as a person, but as someone lower. Whenever Adrian was around, Clara pretended to be polite, but the moment he left for meetings or trips, her attitude changed. She would call Grace in a sharp tone, order her around with no kindness, and sometimes insult her for small mistakes. If a glass was not shining enough, Clara would scold her. If the flowers in the vase were not arranged properly, she would speak harshly. Grace endured it quietly because she needed the job, but every word cut her heart. She wondered how someone so loved by Adrian could treat others with such coldness. One evening, Adrian was preparing for a big charity dinner. Wealthy guests, politicians, and artists were coming to his mansion. Clara was excited because it meant she would be in the center of attention, wearing her new gown and sparkling necklace. Grace had worked all day polishing the silver plates, placing tall candles on the dining table, and arranging fresh roses in every corner of the hall. By late evening, she was tired but still moving with quiet energy, making sure everything was perfect. As the time of the dinner approached, Adrian was still in his study upstairs talking with his lawyer on the phone. Clara was in the main hall, checking her reflection in the tall mirrors. When she saw a small speck of dust on the glass near the dining table, her face twisted with irritation. She turned to Grace, who was carrying a tray of crystal glasses, and snapped at her. "Can you not even clean a mirror properly?" she said sharply. Grace lowered her eyes. "I am sorry, madam, I will clean it again." Clara shook her head and laughed, but it was not a kind laugh. "Sorry is all you ever say. I wonder why Adrian keeps you here. If it were up to me, I would replace you with someone who actually knows how to work." Grace quietly put down the tray and picked up a cloth to wipe the glass again. She did not reply. She never did, because she knew any word would only make things worse. But inside, her chest felt heavy. She thought of her family and reminded herself to stay patient. At that moment, Clara's friend Mia entered through the side door. She was also dressed for the evening. Mia laughed when she saw Grace wiping the mirror nervously. "Clara, why are you always so strict with this maid?" Mia asked. Clara smirked. "Because she is clumsy. Look at her. She can't even clean a piece of glass without missing a spot. People like her are only good for running around and carrying trays." Grace's hand froze on the glass. The words cut deeper than usual because Mia was watching and laughing too. She wanted to cry, but she held back. She reminded herself that she could not show weakness in front of them. What Clara and Mia did not know was that Adrian had ended his call early and was coming down the stairs. He had paused when he heard Clara's raised voice. His sharp mind caught every word, and his calm face slowly grew cold. He stood at the edge of the staircase, hidden by the shadows, and watched as Clara continued. "You should be thankful you even have this job," Clara said to Grace, her tone mocking. If you were not in this house, you would still be living in some small broken place. Do you even realize who you are working for? This is Adrian's mansion, not some cheap inn. You should bow with gratitude every time you walk through these doors." Grace swallowed hard. She placed the cloth aside and whispered, "Yes, madam." Clara raised her chin proudly. "Good, at least you know your place." Adrian's heart tightened as he listened. This was not the Clara he thought he knew. This was not the woman he had brought into his life with trust and admiration. He had always believed she carried herself with grace, but here she was, belittling someone innocent, someone who had only ever been loyal. He remained still, his eyes fixed on the scene, and something inside him began to change. The dinner that night went smoothly for the guests. They never saw the storm brewing in Adrian's heart. He welcomed them, smiled, and gave his speeches. Clara stayed by his side, glowing in her gown, and Grace moved quietly around the hall, serving drinks and carrying plates. But Adrian's mind was not at peace. He kept remembering Clara's tone, her cruel words, and the look in Grace's eyes when she lowered her head. Late at night, after the last guest had left and the candles were dim, Adrian walked to his study alone. He sat in his leather chair, staring at the books on the shelf, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of his past, of how he had started as the son of a schoolteacher and how he had risen step by step. He thought of the values his father had taught him, respect, kindness, and fairness. And then he thought of Clara, the woman who stood by his side in the public eye but revealed a different face in private. Adrian realized something important. A person's true nature was not shown in how they treated the powerful, but in how they treated those with no power. Clara had failed this test in the worst way. The mask she wore in public had fallen, and Adrian had seen her clearly. The night passed slowly, and Adrian did not sleep. By morning, he had made a decision. The path ahead would not be easy, and what he was about to do would shock everyone around him. But he knew he could not stay silent, not after what he had witnessed. The story of Clara's arrogance was only beginning, and soon the world would see how Adrian, the billionaire everyone admired, would respond in a way that left people speechless. The morning sun rose slowly over the mansion, painting the sky with soft shades of gold. Adrian had not closed his eyes all night. He sat near the window of his study, staring out at the garden where the flowers were beginning to bloom. His mind was heavy with thoughts and his heart was troubled. He could still hear Clara's sharp voice echoing in his ears, the way she had spoken to Grace as if she were nothing. Adrian had always believed that wealth and success meant nothing if a person could not show respect to others. The truth he had seen last night was something he could no longer ignore. Clara, on the other hand, woke up late in the morning. She stretched on the silk sheets, smiling at the memory of the previous night. She thought about the way the guests admired her dress and jewelry. She believed she had impressed everyone, and she was sure Adrian would praise her for being the perfect hostess. She had no idea that Adrian had been watching her cruel behavior. Grace had already started her morning work. She swept the floors, arranged the breakfast table, and cleaned the glass doors that opened into the garden. Her eyes looked tired, but she kept moving because she knew her duty. She thought of the words Clara had spoken to her and felt a weight in her chest. She wanted to leave, but she could not afford to lose this job. Her family depended on her. When Adrian came down the stairs, Clara rushed to him with a bright smile. "Good morning, Adrian. Did you sleep well?" Adrian gave a small nod, but his face remained calm and unreadable. Clara expected him to sit beside her at the table, but instead he walked past her and sat quietly at the far end. She did not notice the change in his mood. "Grace," Clara called sharply, pointing to the fruit bowl. "The apples are not polished enough. Do it again. I don't want anything less than perfect." Grace picked up the apples silently, but before she could walk away, Adrian's voice filled the room. "That will not be necessary, Grace," he said firmly. His tone was calm but carried weight. "The apples are fine." Grace looked at him with surprise. Clara froze, her smile fading for a second, but she quickly tried to cover it with a laugh. "Oh, Adrian, I was only trying to make sure the table looks perfect for you." Adrian's eyes rested on her, cold and steady. There is a difference between expecting perfection and insulting someone. "Do you understand that, Clara?" Clara blinked, confused by his words. She had never heard him speak to her in such a tone before. She tried to laugh again. "Of course I understand. I didn't mean anything by it." Adrian said nothing more. He quietly ate his breakfast, his mind already set on what needed to be done. Later that day, Adrian called Grace to his study. She entered nervously, holding her hands together. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" she asked softly. Adrian shook his head. "No, Grace, you did nothing wrong. I only want to ask you something." He looked at her carefully. "Has Clara treated you this way before, or was last night the first time?" Grace lowered her eyes. She hesitated, afraid of what might happen if she spoke. Adrian noticed her silence and spoke gently. "Grace, I want the truth. Do not be afraid. You have my word that nothing bad will happen to you if you speak honestly." Slowly, Grace lifted her eyes. "Sir, this is not the first time. She has spoken to me in such a way many times, but I did not want to trouble you, so I kept quiet. I need this job for my family, so I accepted everything." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his hands folded. His suspicion was confirmed. Clara's behavior was not a mistake of one night, but a pattern she had hidden from him. His respect for Grace grew even more. She had endured pain in silence only to protect her family. That strength touched his heart. "Thank you for being honest," Adrian said. "You have nothing to fear. Continue your work as usual. Leave the rest to me." Grace nodded, bowed slightly, and left the room. Her heart felt lighter because for the first time someone had listened to her pain. That evening, Clara prepared herself again. She wore a sparkling dress, expecting Adrian to take her out for dinner. She entered his study without knocking, smiling brightly. "Adrian, are you ready?" "I made a reservation at the new restaurant in town." Adrian looked at her calmly. "I am not going out tonight," Clara frowned. "Why not?" "We always go out on Fridays. People will expect to see us." Adrian closed the file he was reading and stood up. "Clara, we need to talk. And this time I want you to listen without interruption." Clara's smile faded. She slowly sat down, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Last night," Adrian began, "I saw how you spoke to Grace. I heard every word you said, the arrogance, the insults, the mockery. I was standing at the staircase when you humiliated her." His eyes were sharp, his voice firm. "I cannot believe the woman I trusted would show such cruelty." Clara's heart raced. She forced a laugh. "Adrian, you misunderstand. I was only teasing. You know how servants are. They need to be pushed or they become lazy." Adrian shook his head. "No, Clara, what you did was not teasing. It was disrespect. It showed me the truth about your character. A person's worth is revealed not by how they treat the rich, but how they treat the poor. And last night you failed that test." Clara's face turned red. "Are you really judging me for scolding a maid?" "Adrian, you are being dramatic. She is just enough," Adrian said, raising his hand. "Do not call her just anything. She is a human being. She works hard and with honesty, something I value above everything. Your behavior has embarrassed me, but more importantly, it has hurt someone who did nothing wrong." Clara stood up angrily. "So now you care more about a maid than about me? After everything I have done for you, after standing by your side in public, after representing you among your business partners, this is what you say to me?" Adrian looked at her with calm eyes. "Standing by my side in public means nothing if in private you destroy the dignity of others. I do not need a partner who shines in front of cameras but darkens the lives of those around her." For the first time, Clara realized Adrian was serious. She felt a wave of fear. "Adrian, please. You are taking this too far. I can change. I will be nicer to her. It was just a mistake." Adrian turned away from her and walked to the window. His voice was quiet but strong. "It is not about one mistake. It is about who you are when no one is watching. And last night I saw the real you. I cannot close my eyes to it anymore." Clara tried to argue, but his silence told her that words would not change his decision. For the first time since she had met him, Clara felt powerless. She left the study in anger, slamming the door behind her, but inside she was shaken. The days that followed were tense in the mansion. Clara tried to win Adrian's favor with sweet words and gestures, but his distance grew. He remained polite but cold. He spent more time in his study, handling business matters, and less time with her. Clara noticed the change and grew restless. She feared losing the life she had built with him, the luxury and attention that came with his name. Grace continued her work quietly, but she noticed the change too. She saw Clara's forced smiles and Adrian's silence. She wondered what would happen next, but she kept her head down. One evening, Adrian invited his closest friends and business partners for a private dinner at the mansion. Clara thought this was her chance to shine again, to show Adrian she could still be the perfect partner. She wore her most elegant gown and greeted the guests with charm. But as the evening went on, Adrian did something unexpected. When the guests sat down at the table, he asked Grace to serve the wine. As she moved carefully, Adrian looked at his friends and spoke. Many people here know me as a man of business, a man of success. But I want to share something more important tonight. True success is not measured by wealth, but by respect. Respect for every person, no matter their position. He glanced at Clara, whose face stiffened. Last week I saw something in this very hall that reminded me of this truth. A person with wealth and beauty can still fail if they lack kindness. And I will never allow disrespect in my house. The room grew silent. Clara's heart pounded. She realized Adrian was not only speaking to his friends, but sending her a message in front of them. Her cheeks burned with shame. Grace lowered her eyes as she poured the wine, but her heart filled with gratitude. Adrian had defended her in a way she never expected. The guests exchanged glances, impressed by Adrian's words. Some nodded, knowing he was a man who lived by his values, not just by his wealth. That night, Clara could not sleep. Adrian's words echoed in her mind, and she feared what was coming next. For Adrian had not only seen her true nature, but he had also revealed it to others. The path ahead was clear. Adrian had made up his mind, and soon, the world would witness a decision that would leave everyone speechless. The days that followed the private dinner were heavy inside the mansion. The silence between Adrian and Clara grew larger, like an invisible wall separating them. Adrian was polite but distant, and Clara could feel that the warmth she once enjoyed from him had faded away. For a woman who loved attention and admiration, this coldness was unbearable. Clara spent hours in front of the mirror trying on different dresses, convincing herself that if she looked beautiful enough, Adrian would return to her. She reminded herself of the parties they had attended, the photographs in the magazines, the whispers of envy from other women who wished they could be in her place. But now for the first time she was afraid. Afraid that everything could be slipping away. Adrian, meanwhile, carried himself with calm control. He did not shout, he did not argue, but inside he was firm with his decision. He had seen Clara's true character, and no amount of beauty could hide it now. He continued his business meetings, answered calls, and made plans for his next projects. But in his heart, he was thinking about the values that defined his life. He thought of his late father, who had always told him that power and wealth mean nothing if a man cannot protect the dignity of others. Grace noticed the change too. She worked quietly, but she could not ignore the tension. Clara's sharp words toward her had lessened, not because of kindness, but because Clara knew Adrian's eyes were watching. Still, Grace felt uneasy. She wanted to leave the mansion to escape the conflict, but she also knew that Adrian respected her and needed her honesty. One afternoon, as Grace was arranging fresh flowers in the hall, Clara entered, her face restless. She looked around to make sure Adrian was not nearby, then turned sharply toward Grace. "You think you are clever, don't you?" Clara hissed, lowering her voice. "You think just because Adrian defended you, you are special now?" Grace froze, holding the vase in her hands. "No, madam. I never thought that. I only do my work." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Don't play innocent with me. I know women like you. You wait quietly, pretending to be humble, and then you steal attention. Do not think you can take my place." Grace shook her head quickly. "I would never dream of that. I respect Mr. Adrian. I only want to do my duty." Clara gave her a long, cold stare before turning away. But deep inside, Clara's fear was growing. She had noticed Adrian's respect for Grace, his calm way of defending her, and she could not stop the thought that perhaps Grace had earned something she herself had lost: Adrian's trust. That evening, Adrian found Grace in the kitchen. She was washing the silver trays when he stepped inside. She quickly tried to move aside, but he spoke gently. "Grace, may I speak with you?" She wiped her hands nervously. "Yes, sir." Adrian looked at her kindly. "I want you to know that you are safe here. No one will take away your dignity again. If Clara speaks harshly, I want you to tell me. Do not stay silent for fear of losing your job. Do you understand?" Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "Yes, sir. Thank you. You are very kind." Adrian gave a small nod and left. His heart was firm. He knew the next steps would not be easy, but he was ready. A week later, Adrian hosted a large gathering at his mansion for business partners and social leaders. It was more formal than the previous dinner. Clara was excited again, thinking this would be her chance to repair the image Adrian had of her. She wore a glittering gown, styled her hair perfectly, and stood close to Adrian, greeting the guests with charm. But Adrian had planned something different. After the meal was served, Adrian stood up to give a speech. The hall grew quiet as all eyes turned toward him. His voice was calm, steady, and powerful. My friends, tonight we celebrate not only business but values. In this world where wealth and power are praised, it is easy to forget the simplest truth, that every human being deserves respect. No matter their position, no matter their work, they are equal in dignity. The guests nodded, some clapping lightly. Clara smiled beside him, thinking his words were ordinary. But then, Adrian continued. Recently, I witnessed something in this house that disturbed me deeply. Someone I trusted showed arrogance and cruelty to a worker who has done nothing but serve with honesty. That moment reminded me of the lesson my father taught me, that character is revealed not in public but in private, not in how you treat the powerful, but in how you treat the powerless. The room grew silent. Clara's smile froze on her face. She realized his words were pointing at her, though no name was spoken. Guests exchanged glances, whispering softly. Adrian turned and looked at Grace, who was standing quietly with a tray in her hands. This woman, he said, is Grace. She has served in my house with loyalty and care. She works with dignity and never complains, even under pressure. She deserves respect, and she has mine. Grace's hands trembled. She had never expected such words from him in front of so many people. Her face turned red, and she lowered her eyes, overwhelmed with emotion. The guests clapped loudly now. Many admired Adrian's courage to speak about values in such a gathering. Clara felt as if the ground was shaking under her. Her eyes burned with shame and her hands grew cold. She forced herself to smile, but inside she was breaking. After the guests left, Clara rushed to Adrian in anger. How could you do that? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you know what they will think? Adrian looked at her firmly. They will think the truth. They will know that I value respect more than appearance. If you feel embarrassed, it is because you know what you did. Clara's voice rose. So this is it?
You are ready to throw away everything we have for the sake of a maid?
Adrian's tone was calm but sharp. I'm not throwing anything away, you are. Because respect cannot be traded for luxury, and love cannot survive without kindness. Clara's chest rose and fell with anger. For a moment she wanted to argue, but she saw in his eyes that nothing she said would change him. He had made his decision, and it terrified her. That night, Clara sat in her room alone, thinking of her life without Adrian. No more parties, no more wealth, no more photographs in magazines. She tried to plan how she could convince him to forgive her, but deep inside she knew the truth. Adrian was not a man who changed his mind once his values were broken. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his study thinking quietly. He was not acting out of anger, but out of principle. He knew the days ahead would test him, but he also knew that standing silent against cruelty would make him unworthy of the life he had built. Grace, alone in the servants' quarters, prayed quietly for strength. She did not know what Adrian would do next, but she felt gratitude in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a servant, but as a human being. The mansion carried a heavy silence that night. The walls had witnessed arrogance, pain, and now truth. Soon the world outside would learn of Adrian's decision, and it would shake not only Clara but everyone who thought wealth excused cruelty. And when that moment came, it would leave everyone speechless. The mansion no longer felt the same. Once Clara had ruled the halls with her laughter, her polished charm, and her presence beside Adrian at every event. But now the air was heavy between them. Adrian moved through the rooms with calm purpose while Clara wandered restlessly, unsure of where she stood. Every glance Adrian gave her was polite, but it carried a distance she could not break. Grace, on the other hand, carried herself with the same quiet humility she always had. Yet inside she felt the change. Adrian's defense of her had given her strength, and for the first time she believed her dignity mattered. She worked with the same dedication, but her heart was lighter because she knew she was no longer invisible. One morning, Adrian received a call from the board of directors of his hotel chain. They wanted him to attend a press conference where new community projects would be announced. Adrian agreed, but he had already decided something. He would not bring Clara with him as he usually did. In the past, Clara had always stood by his side, smiling for the cameras, representing his image. But this time Adrian wanted to stand alone. When Clara learned of the conference, she entered his study with forced cheer. "Adrian, what should I wear for the event?" "I saw a new gown at the boutique. It would look perfect in front of the cameras." Adrian looked up from his desk calmly. "You will not be attending this time." Clara's face went pale. "What? But I always go with you." "People expect to see us together." Adrian's voice was steady. "This event is about community and respect. I will stand there as myself, not as part of a performance. You will stay here." Clara's lips trembled. She wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his eyes. For the first time, she realized she had already lost her place beside him. The day of the press conference came, and Adrian spoke with passion about the new programs his company would sponsor: housing for workers, scholarships for children, and medical support for families in need. He emphasized respect and dignity for every person. The media praised his speech, calling it one of the most powerful statements of his career. Pictures of him standing tall and confident were printed across newspapers, but Clara was nowhere to be seen. When Clara saw the headlines the next morning, her fear deepened. Without Adrian, she was nothing in the public eye. She paced her room, trying to think of ways to regain control. She told herself she would apologize to him, but pride stopped her. Instead, anger burned in her chest. She blamed Grace, believing that if Grace had never entered their lives, Adrian would still be devoted to her. That afternoon, Clara confronted Grace again in the kitchen. Her eyes were sharp and her voice carried venom. "This is all your fault," she snapped. "You think you are so innocent, but you have turned Adrian against me. You don't belong here. You belong in the streets, not in this mansion." Grace kept her eyes lowered, her hands trembling as she scrubbed a pan. "Madam, please. I did nothing. I only work as I always have." Clara leaned closer, her words like poison. "If I lose Adrian, I will make sure you suffer for it." Grace said nothing, but her silence was full of pain. What Clara did not know was that Adrian had entered the hallway and heard every word. He stopped at the doorway, his eyes dark with disappointment. For the second time, he had seen Clara's cruelty unmasked. "Enough," Adrian said, stepping into the kitchen. His voice was calm but powerful. "Clara, leave her alone." Clara spun around, shocked. "Adrian, I heard everything," Adrian interrupted. "You speak of suffering as if it is a game. You forget that Grace is a human being with feelings, with a family, with dignity, and you forget that this house will never allow cruelty." Clara's face turned red. "Why are you always taking her side?" "She is nothing. I am the one who stood by you all this time." Adrian's eyes were steady. "She is not nothing. She is honest and she is kind. Qualities that matter more than beauty or wealth. And as for standing by me, you stood only for yourself. You wanted the spotlight, the praise, the luxury. You never stood for me because if you had, you would have respected what I value most." Clara's chest heaved. She wanted to scream, but Adrian's words struck her harder than she expected. "I cannot continue like this," Adrian said firmly. "This relationship is over." The words hung in the air like thunder. Clara gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. You can't mean that." Adrian nodded slowly. "I mean every word. You showed me who you are when you thought I was not watching. That truth cannot be erased." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but they were mixed with anger. "After everything I gave you, after everything I sacrificed, you are choosing a maid over me?" Adrian's voice was quiet but strong. "I am choosing respect over cruelty. I am choosing values over vanity. This is not about Grace, this is about you. And the truth is, I cannot build a life with someone who humiliates others." Clara's knees weakened. She stumbled back. Unable to believe her place in Adrian's world was slipping away. She tried to hold on to her pride, but her voice cracked. "You will regret this." Adrian turned away, his decision unshaken. "The only regret would be staying silent when I should have acted." Grace stood frozen, unable to move. She had never expected Adrian to end everything so directly. A part of her felt relief, but another part felt sorrow. Not for Clara's loss of wealth, but for the emptiness she had brought upon herself through her own arrogance. The news of Adrian and Clara's breakup spread quickly. The media whispered, guests at social clubs gossiped, and people in the city wondered what had happened. Adrian, however, said nothing to the press. He continued his work with dignity, letting his actions speak louder than rumors. Clara packed her belongings with shaking hands. Every dress, every jewel, every shoe she placed in her suitcase felt like a reminder of the life she had built on shallow grounds. When she finally left the mansion, her face was pale and her eyes were filled with bitterness. Grace watched from a distance as the car drove Clara away. She felt no joy, only a quiet sadness. She whispered a prayer in her heart that Clara would one day learn the value of kindness. Inside the mansion, Adrian stood in the study, looking out at the garden. He felt no anger, no victory, only calm. He knew he had done what was right. He had defended dignity, not only for Grace, but for every person who had ever been looked down upon. That night, as the house grew quiet, Adrian walked into the hall where Grace was polishing the silver once again. She looked up nervously, unsure if she should speak, but Adrian gave her a gentle smile. "You have nothing to fear anymore," he said softly. "This house is your safe place. As long as you are here, you will be treated with respect." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. The mansion seemed lighter that evening. The storm of arrogance had passed, and in its place was peace. Adrian knew the journey was not over. The world outside still watched him, waiting to see what he would do next. But inside, he had already won the most important battle, the battle of values. And soon, his next actions would not only surprise the people in his circle, but would also inspire many beyond the mansion walls. The story was not ending. It was only moving toward a moment that would truly leave everyone speechless. The days after Clara's departure brought a new rhythm into Adrian's mansion. The halls, once filled with tension and pride, now carried a quieter peace. Adrian focused his energy on his work and his plans for community projects. Grace continued her duties with her usual dedication, but her heart felt lighter. She no longer carried the fear of humiliation in every step she took. The mansion staff also noticed the difference. They had always seen how Clara treated Grace, and though they respected Clara as the lady of the house, they had silently disapproved of her harshness. Now they felt more comfortable in their roles, and the atmosphere in the mansion became warmer. Adrian, though relieved by his decision, spent long hours in thought. Ending his relationship with Clara had been necessary, but it had also left a gap in his life. He had always believed companionship was about shared values, not just appearances, and he was determined not to let his heart settle for less again. One morning, Adrian received an invitation to a charity event hosted by the city's council. It was an evening where influential figures, community leaders, and business owners gathered to discuss projects for the future. Adrian accepted, knowing it was an opportunity to speak further about the vision he had already shared at the press conference. The evening of the event arrived. Adrian wore a simple but elegant suit, carrying himself with confidence. When he entered the hall, many eyes turned toward him. Whispers spread quickly. Some wondered where Clara was, while others admired Adrian's decision to attend alone. When Adrian took the stage to deliver his speech, his words carried weight. He spoke of fairness, of building opportunities for those who had been overlooked, and of the importance of dignity in every human life. His sincerity reached the audience, and many were moved by his passion. Meanwhile, Grace, unaware of the event's scale, remained at the mansion completing her evening tasks. She had no idea that Adrian's words were inspiring change far beyond the walls of the house. After the event, Adrian returned home to find Grace tidying the library. She looked up in surprise when he entered, but quickly lowered her eyes. Adrian paused, watching her work quietly. For a moment, he reflected on how much strength she carried in her silence. "You work too much," Adrian said gently. Grace shook her head. "It is my duty, sir." Adrian stepped closer. "Duty is important, but so is rest. You have carried many burdens without complaint. That is something I admire deeply." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she placed a book back on the shelf. She had never heard words of admiration directed at her before. "I only do what is right," she whispered. Adrian smiled faintly. "And that is what makes you rare." The conversation ended there, but the meaning lingered in Grace's heart. For the first time, she began to see that perhaps she was not as invisible as she had always believed. Days turned into weeks, and the city continued to talk about Adrian. His decisions, his speeches, and his commitment to community work became examples others admired. Journalists wrote about his values, and young entrepreneurs looked up to him. But inside the mansion, Adrian lived simply, finding comfort in moments of honesty rather than the praise of the world. Clara, however, struggled in her new life. She attended parties alone, hoping to keep her place in high society, But without Adrian by her side, the charm she once carried lost its strength. People whispered about her downfall, and though she tried to appear strong, she could feel the weight of isolation pressing down on her. Yet her pride would not allow her to admit her mistakes. One afternoon, Adrian received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was Clara. She walked in wearing her finest dress, her head held high, but her eyes betrayed her desperation. "Adrian," she began, forcing a smile, "I came to speak with you. We had our misunderstandings, but we can start again. We were once the most admired couple in the city. We can be that again." Adrian looked at her calmly, his hands resting on his desk. "Clara, what we had was built on an image, not on truth. I will not return to something that lacked respect." Clara's smile faltered. "So this is truly the end?" Adrian nodded. "It ended the day I saw who you truly were. I wish you well, but my path no longer includes you." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Then with a stiff nod, she turned and walked away. It was the last time Adrian saw her. Back at the mansion, life continued with quiet steadiness. Grace became more confident, though she never lost her humility. She still worked diligently, but Adrian noticed how her steps carried less fear. He began to engage her in small conversations, asking about her family, her dreams, and her thoughts on life. Grace hesitated at first, unsure if she was allowed to speak so openly. But Adrian listened with genuine interest, and little by little she began to share more. She told him about her childhood in a small village, about the hardships her family faced, and about the simple joys she cherished, like watching the sunrise or hearing the laughter of children. Adrian found her words refreshing. Unlike the polished conversations he often heard at social gatherings, Grace's stories carried truth and sincerity. Her perspective reminded him of why he valued dignity above all else. One evening, after a long day of work, Adrian invited Grace to join him in the garden. The air was cool and the sky was painted with stars. They walked in silence for a while before Adrian spoke. "Grace, do you ever think of a different life for yourself?" he asked. Grace lowered her gaze. "Sometimes, sir. But I do not dream of wealth or power. I only wish for a life where I am respected, where my family is safe, and where I can live without fear." Adrian nodded slowly. "That is a noble dream, and it is a dream you deserve." Grace's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Deep inside, however, her heart stirred with emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. As weeks passed, Adrian's respect for Grace grew stronger. He admired her quiet strength, her honesty, and her kindness. And though he never said it aloud, he began to feel something deeper forming within him. One morning, Adrian made a decision. He called all the mansion staff together in the main hall. Grace stood among them, nervous as always, not knowing what was about to happen. Adrian addressed them with a calm but steady voice. "This house has always stood for excellence, but excellence means nothing without respect. Today I want to make something clear. Every person who works here will be treated with dignity. No one will be looked down upon. No one will be humiliated. This is not just a rule, it is a promise." The staff exchanged surprised glances, their faces lighting up with relief. Grace, standing in the back, felt her eyes fill with tears. Adrian's words were not just about the house, they were about her. After the gathering, Adrian approached Grace privately. "You taught me something important," he said softly. "Your strength reminded me that true greatness lies in humility. For that I will always be grateful." Grace's voice trembled as she replied, "I never thought I could teach you anything, sir." Adrian smiled. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from the simplest truths. That night the mansion glowed with a warmth it had never known before. Adrian had restored not only peace within its walls but also hope. And Grace, though still humble, carried a new sense of worth within her heart. The world outside continued to admire Adrian for his speeches and his success. But what truly defined him was not the applause of strangers. It was the respect he gave to those around him, especially to a woman who had once believed she was invisible. And though their story was only beginning, the lessons they had lived through would forever remain a reminder that dignity, once defended, could never be taken away again.